Alright, hello everybody and welcome back for another Overwatch League Season 2 fan thoughts and analysis video. Today I am going over the final roster of the original 12 teams from the first season of the Overwatch League, and we are finishing off the original rosters with, original teams I guess, with the New York Excelsior, the team with the best record during the regular season, winners of the Atlantic Division, finishing in the semi-finals overall. The New York Excelsior are my favorite team personally, so I want to just quickly address that. There will be probably levels of bias in this video just because they're the team I know the best, they're the team I've watched the most, they're the team I have the most knowledge of, so there might be a little bit more information, or I might feel a little bit more confident talking about players. Could also ramble a little bit more. Just want to warn you that that is a very real possibility with the New York Excelsior. But let's talk about their offseason and the changes they made. They did not make a lot. They released one player, and that is Giannis, or Giannis, or Janice, or however you pronounce it. I might pronounce it any one of those three ways when I do pronounce it throughout this video, which probably shouldn't be very often, but that is the one player they got rid of. They made two signings. We will talk about those when we get to those. But of course, this team is one that was in a very interesting position last season. 3 losses through the first 3 stages. 3 losses alone in Stage 4, which is still pretty good, but they doubled their loss total in one stage. And then a rough playoff run, which I think has put some doubt in some people, myself included, in how well the New York Excelsior will do. Plus, kind of a lackluster display in the World Cup hasn't given any reason to believe that this team is in a, once again, pinnacle peak team as they seemed to be throughout the regular season. Obviously, they did not win the overall playoffs. They did not win the Overwatch League Championship, so this is a very interesting team. They're in a very interesting position. So let's start by taking a look at this team's DPS core, and we will start with none other than the team captain, Biolby, one of the best tracers in the world. He believes he is the best tracer in the world. I tend to agree, and that's not just coming from the point of view of a fan. I just think that he seemed like the best one from what I saw. So very interesting player, Biolby. Pretty diverse hero pool. We saw him play, of course, Tracer, mostly in the first 3 stages. We saw him play a lot of Widowmaker in Stage 4. He played some McCree occasionally. But the thing that I think is most interesting about Biolby is that he seems to be the one who, in my opinion, he felt like the player that had the most trouble adjusting, just because he is a very big Tracer player, and Tracer was not a big part of the meta in Stage 4. And I think a lot of the struggle that this team ran into was that you had Biolby, who was playing Tracer, that's his hero, and Tracer wasn't in the meta. So you can look at Biolby and think maybe not in the best position based on what we saw last season. I still think Biolby is very good, and I think this off-season will be very good for him and the rest of this team. The problem I think that Biolby will have adjusting to the way the new meta is that he has to have a hero other than Tracer be his mainstay. And he's this team's captain. If he can't play on the a high level, a Brigitte or a Widowmaker that they need, or if he has to play Zarya, if he has to play Roadhog, he has to play whatever tank they may need him to play. It could be Reinhardt, whatever. If he can't play, and he wouldn't play Reinhardt, but he would play the Zarya or even possibly the D.Va if they would rather have him playing the D.Va. Now, I don't think, in the event that this team is running triple tank, triple support, I don't expect Biolby to be the player running the Zarya. I think that would be Libero, who we'll get to, of course, in a second. But Biolby is interesting to me, and I wonder how much he will play If this team's doing a lot of 2-2-2 compositions and dive compositions, which is what they were the best at last season, well, then I definitely would expect Saviobi to play. The problem is that is not the meta right now, and I wonder what that will do to affect this roster's DPS play. But next, we're going to take a look at Libero, who I just talked about, who I think is this team's I personally think this is their best DPS player, purely because he has such a diverse hero pool. I mean, in terms of high-level play, he can play Genji on a high level, he can play Hanzo on a high level, Pharah, Junkrat, Tracer. He can play a lot of heroes at a high level. I remember one broadcast, I don't remember which caster, but they said that some players referred to him as the best Hanzo in the Overwatch League. Libero is a very good player, and that diverse hero pool is very important, and it's a big part of why I believe that Libero is the most important member of this team on that DPS side, because he plays what they need him to play. If they need him to play Tracer, he's going to play Tracer. Obviously, you have Sabiobi in the back who can play Tracer, but if you need a Tracer and Sabiobi's not in, well, Libero can be that Tracer. If you need a Widowmaker and Pine's not in, or whatever, if Sabiobi's in and you'd rather have Sabiobi on Tracer and you need Libero on Widowmaker, you can do that. Libero is a very, very good player. He impressed me consistently throughout last season. I think his Pharah play was incredible, especially, but his Hanzo and his Genji were definitely pretty good. Now, obviously, this is a team that focused a lot on dive, and they played dive meta really well. So, Libero, I think, has to be that big player. I think if they're going to have someone running Zarya, most likely it's going to be Libero. I don't see him playing another hero. The thing is, it's kind of the interesting debate of who would play the Brigitte on this team. This team has 5 DPS players. We're going to get to the other 3, of course, here in a second. They have 5 DPS players. So they have no shortage of players that they can assign. You're going to be our Brigitte, or you're going to be our Zarya, whatever. But you have to figure out that if they're running all these DPS players, they have to find out a way to get them all to play. Especially when you have a player like Pine, who is a specialist, right? Pine's thing mainly is that he is a DPS player. Obviously DPS player. He's a hit scan player. I don't know. My mind is a little out of it right now. He's a hit scan player, right? He's your Widowmaker. He's your McCree. That's what he plays the most. And yeah, I mean that's something that you have to understand. He is someone who is going to be playing that very specific role on this team. And if you have multiple different players that kind of fulfill this same kind of hit scan role or whatever, or you have a lot of crossover with hero pools, that's where you run into problems. Now, you can use that to your advantage, because you could say, for your game plan, right? You're game planning, you're like, all right, here's our plan. For this map, whatever, we're going to run Pine, right? Then this map, for that hero, we're going to run Sabiobi. And then this map, we're going to run Flower. And then this map, we're going to run... You can kind of pick and choose who you want to run in that DPS role, and it allows you more flexibility, but at the same time, you're not also then giving players that playtime. And I don't really know what the full reason is. And it'll be interesting to see how this team adjusts to having so many DPS players. But I think this season's going to start off very interesting, because I have no idea what the meta is going to be. I have no idea if Ashe is going to be part of the meta, if Brigitte is still going to be dominant, and if Tracer and Dive are going to be dead. Who knows? But this team has prepared, of course, by adding more DPS play. And that starts with Flower, who was on this team last season, technically, but he was too young to play, so they demoted him to the Academy team, XL2 Academy, and then brought him back into the hero, or the roster for New York Excelsior. Now, Flower, much like Libero, is a very diverse hero pool, but he's a little bit more hit scan. But he does still have a good Genji, a good Pharah, but he's that Soldier 76, that McCree, that Widowmaker. He got very well known in 2017 World Cup for Team South Korea as Widowmaker. So he's a good player, and he's a player that we will definitely see some play time out of. He might even replace Pine. Not positive that's going to happen. He might play a lot more than Pine does. There's really no way to tell right now exactly what this team's going to be with all of this talent that they have and with all this DPS play. We don't exactly know what to expect from them, but Flower is someone who has been very well known, is a very good player, and it was only natural he was going to end up on this team. And I think some people thought maybe he would leave, or that Pine would leave. They wouldn't keep them both because there's no reason to keep both, but they did. I think Flower has some kind of loyalty to this team, which is why he stayed. He definitely could have gone somewhere and been guaranteed start on any team, but I think he just chose New York, probably because they were successful, and you want to stay with a team that's successful, but also because maybe he's that piece they need to go the distance. But he'll be interesting to watch. I'm excited to see which of these DPS players gets the start. They, of course, have one more DPS player, which is Nene, which is once again where you get into that interesting debate of who plays the Zarya, because Nene actually has a relatively good Zarya. His Zarya play is not bad. Now, Nene is not someone who's just turning 18 or whatnot. He is 22. He just was not on an Overwatch League roster, but he was promoted from XL2 Academy to the New York Excelsior. His hero pool, to my knowledge, is not the deepest. I didn't watch a lot of Academy and contenders, but I know like Tracer, Widowmaker are two heroes that he plays, and then he's got that Zarya. So he'll be an interesting player to watch. He is maybe the person they have on the Brigitte. We don't know, but when you have 5 DPS players, you can really just do whatever, and you have options with them all to run what you need to run. I'm very interested to see how the team works around what they have and how they figure out exactly the best way to utilize all of their DPS players, because that's a lot. It's 5 talented DPS players, 3 of whom have Overwatch League experience, 2 of them have Contenders experience. One of those Contenders players was a World Cup player, was on this team already, and just wasn't old enough to play. It's a very interesting situation we have with this team's DPS roster, and I'm amazed to see how it goes with 5 DPS players of that caliber. It's one of the biggest question marks I have with this team of who's going to play the most, how are they going to integrate the team, but I think it will. I trust this team's ability to get work done. But that's enough time talking about DPS players. That is half of their roster, though, so makes sense that I would spend that much time talking about it. But let's move on now to their off-tank, which is Meko. They only have one off-tank player, who's their flex player, but he's their off-tank player. He's a very good D.Va, considered by many to be one of the best D.Va players in the world. He is a good D.Va player. He also can play some Zarya. And I mention that, of course, because I've been talking about all these DPS players playing Zarya, and that's typically what we see. Sometimes you'll have a team like the Shanghai Dragons, where in a perfect world, they would always have Geggery running Zarya, because she's a very good Zarya, but you can't always necessarily have that. So usually, a team like the London Spitfire, for example, they usually have Prophet play that Zarya. Zarya's kind of DPS heavy, so it makes sense. There's a reason why you kind of see DPS players run Zarya. But Meko will most likely be the D.Va for this team as a mainstay D.Va. I expect that to be the case. And I don't know. I enjoy Meko. I don't expect him to be much different than he was last year. He might be better. But he is a player who definitely was a big part of this team and helped out a lot in getting the team to that big record they had. Next, we have Mono, their main tank. Of course, they had Jonas as a main tank. Last season, they would run both of them, but I think that there was a noticeable difference in play when Jonas played and when Mono played. I think Mono was just better. I remember there was a week where they played 2 games, of course, And in both of those games in that week, they started Jonas, lost the first 2 maps of the series, I can't talk, swapped out Jonas for Meko, or God, for Mono. That always trips me up. For Mono at halftime, and then 3 maps straight. 2 games in a row, and you can just tell that there was a difference in their play styles, and it just didn't work. So now they only have one main tank, and it's Mono. I think Mono's a very good player. I don't question how good he is. I question if he can be the only main tank for this team the whole season. He didn't do it last season. He did it down the stretch for the most part, but as you kind of get late in the season and things don't really matter as much, you can take your starters out a little bit more. You can play and do funky things. But I think Mono is going to have to be that good player that he was. I personally think he was one of the best main tanks last year. At least one of the most important main tanks, because I think when he played, New York was much better than when Jonas played. I'm not saying Jonas is a bad player. I just think his playstyle didn't fit in as well with what New York was trying to do and what they were doing. So I think Mono is a very good player. His Winston is very impressive. Of course, Reinhardt is the main tank right now in these triple tank, triple support compositions, but it'll be very interesting to see how this team acts with just these one main tank and this one flex tank, Diva player. It'll be very interesting, but I think that this team's in a very, very offensive heavy spot, which I think is interesting, because in a world where the meta seems to be dominated by the GOATs, triple tank, triple support comps, New York still looks very heavy in favor of DPS play and dive. So maybe they found some secret strategy to break GOATs that requires a lot of DPS play, but who knows. This team is very interesting, though, and I'm excited to see what the team can do around their main tank players. And obviously, they only got 2 of them, so they only got 2 tanks. So you're going to be seeing Meko and Mono a lot this season. Next, we move on to their supports, and we start with Jay Jonak, the Season 1 MVP, the off healer, the Zenyatta, essentially, for the New York Excelsior. Plays some Ana as well, plays a little bit of Moira. But at the end of the day, Jonak is the Zenyatta player, and he was. I voted for him for MVP, and it wasn't just because he's Jonak and he's on the New York Excelsior. It's that he was the focal point of this team last season. He might not be the captain. He was a big part of their success. He was getting the final blows. He was getting the healing. I mean, he was insane. There was no one like him last season, and I don't expect to see the same thing this season, or at least see the same surprise from it. Obviously, in playoffs last year, it was kind of a single support meta, so you weren't seeing a lot of Jonak, and that kind of hindered play in a way. But we saw Jonak, I believe, play some Roadhog at times. I think Jonak will play what he needs to play, but of course he's most comfortable playing that Zenyatta. It'll be very interesting to see what we see out of this team now. I remember seeing Jonak play some Roadhog, though, like I said, on King's Row during some of those pirate ship compositions. So he obviously can switch off and play some other stuff, but I'm interested to see what the meta's like. It's hard to kind of talk about this without really knowing what the meta's going to be. I think most people expect it to be GOATs, triple tank, triple support compositions, because that is currently, right now, in the game what the meta is, but obviously February is still a couple months away, and the biggest thing is that there will most likely be a new hero announced before the end of Stage 1, so by Stage 3, most likely, we'll have a new hero in the game. I'm sure by Stage 2 it'll be in the game, but by Stage 3 the hero will basically be playable. So it'll be interesting to see how the meta evolves over time, and if it evolves in a way to favor New York. I know there's rumors that New York struggled adjusting to the different metas. I don't know how true that is, but it became clear late in the season that they were starting to struggle. The last part of their support core is their main healers. So they have two, of course. They have Arc and they have Onimo, both of whom are very, very good players. Really, you can put either one in and you're getting about the same results. Arc is probably slightly better than Onimo is. I think they're both fine players. One interesting thing is that Arc played in the qualifier for the World Cup and then was replaced by Onimo for the actual World Cup. Don't know why, but that's what they did. But these are two players that impressed me a lot. Obviously, Arc was on the team for the entire season. Onimo joined during the season, I believe, right before Stage 3. And both played very well. I think overall, Arc is going to bring more to the table just in terms of raw skill, but there was so little difference. I mean, I remember they were showing numbers throughout Stage 3 and even throughout some of Stage 4. When you looked at the numbers, like, in terms of, like, healing and boosting and whatnot, when Arc and when Onimo were in, they were almost identical, which is perfect for them because it allows you to do things slightly different. Because while their numbers are almost identical, there's slight differences in, of course, the way they play. And you can use that to your advantage because you can build these compositions around your team as a whole, right? You have 5 DPS players. You have 2 different main support players. If you're running triple tank, triple support, you'd assume Jonak would be in playing the Zen, if they're running a Zen version of the comp, or even Moira, if they're running a Moira version of the comp. But then you have Onimo or Arc in playing the Lucio. I think Onimo is a little bit more Lucio heavy than Arc is, but I don't know. But you have options available with this team, and it's one of the reasons why I think New York has still this very good chance of being this very dominant team. I don't think they're going to be a, one-loss team, 3 stages in a row type team again. I don't think that they will be as dominant this season as they were last season. I don't think they'll, they might not even win the Atlantic. They have to compete, of course, with London, who proved that they were still very much on top. But this team is very interesting to me because obviously they didn't make a lot of changes. The only change they made in terms of removing from last season was getting rid of Jonas. They brought in a couple new DPS players, but most of their position players, their starters from last season, are all still here. So I look at this team, and at the end of the day, I think it all just comes down to a breakdown of how they choose to use their DPS play. DPS play is what will define this team. Much like it will define the San Francisco Shock, the New York Excelsior will be defined by how they use their DPS players. Because they have a lot of them. Right? Half of their roster is DPS players. They have them for a reason. They have a plan, I'm sure. Obviously, we don't know about their plan. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they kick off their season against the Boston Uprising on February 14th. If you haven't seen, I made a video talking about the Overwatch League season 2 schedules. If you want to check that out, I'll link it in the description and in the cards. But the New York Excelsior have a very tough schedule, I think. There's some issues with their schedule, some things that I think were poorly done with their schedule. So they'll be a very interesting team to see how things go for them, because I don't think their schedule... it doesn't necessarily, It works in their favor if they win the games that are troublesome. It does not work in their favor if they don't win the games that I have issues with. But I have, like I said, I have an entire video talking about the schedule as a whole that I'll link to in the description and in the cards. But the New York Excelsior are a very interesting team. I'm very curious to see how they perform this season. Obviously, everyone kind of thought they were locks to win the grand finals last season. They didn't even make it to the grand finals. So what is the identity for this team? What are they going to show us when they take the stage against the Boston Uprising, the first game of the season for them? What are they going to show us? Because if you ask me, this is a team that has a lot to prove. I don't think Boston Uprising has as much to prove, because I think people are just kind of like, yeah, Boston's kind of done. And if Boston comes out and beats New York, they're just like, wow, look at this Boston Uprising team. The New York Excelsior have a lot to prove when they kick their season off, more than any other team in my opinion. They are in a position where it is very important that they do their best to prove that the end of last season is not a defining trait for this team. That this team is able to adapt, is able to become proficient in the new metas, and it's the problem that this team faced. I don't say this purely as a fan of this team. I say this as just from an outsider's perspective. There was a very clear issue with this team from the change out of the dive meta to the anti-dive or Brigitte meta. And I think that this team will be defined in the early weeks of this season. If they struggle early on, they're probably not going to have a great season. That's pretty indicative. Now, obviously, 12 teams make the playoffs, and if the meta starts changing in their favor late in the season, as long as they're competitive and are getting wins where they need wins and are staying middle of the pack or better, then of course they'll make playoffs. But this is a team that I look at and I see a lot of potential. I see a team that could very, very well be that top team again, but I'm worried about this team at the same time because they, you look at a team like in like the NFL, right? You see a team like the Patriots lose to the Eagles, and they put up a lot of numbers, right? They scored a lot of points, but they ultimately came up short. Or even, I'll use even a better example, a team like the Jaguars, right? The Jaguars last season almost made it to the Super Bowl and barely missed out because they just made a couple mistakes. But you looked at that team and you said, they are so close to being that good team again. They were so good during the season. They were such a dominant team during the season. They're like this close to being that team that can go the distance. And they just barely missed out. They came back this season. They started strong and they fell apart. New York needs to show that they were very good and they got close and they ultimately came up short, but that their shortcoming does not define this team, that this team is capable of winning, because they didn't get the title that they felt was a lock for them. And I think in a way failure is what this team needed to kind of get that fire going. And I think it'll be a very, very competitive division. I've been seeing people say that they think the Pacific is the more competitive division. Maybe that's true, but I still think the top 3 teams in the Overwatch League reside in the Atlantic, and I think the New York Excelsior will end up being one of those 3 teams. But the question is, who are the other 2, and who will take the title in the Atlantic? But that is a video for another day. That is everything I have for you on the New York Excelsior, my opinions, all that kind of stuff. And that is all I have for you on all of the original 12 teams. So Monday we will get started with our expansion teams. We will start with the Atlanta Reign. I'll talk about them. I'll take a look at their roster and my thoughts on their roster. It's a little bit harder to talk about teams with players that I really am not familiar with. So we'll see how that goes. But if you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a like. Or even consider subscribing if that is your kind of thing. Let me know down below what you think about the New York Excelsior going forward. Obviously I have a little bit of a bias towards them, but I can happily engage in a civil discussion about this team and how everyone feels about them. But thank you for watching, as I've already said. Take care of yourselves. Have a good holiday season. And I will see you all in the next video. Alright, peace.